Okay, guys, this video is going to be pretty brief, but basically we've been running into a lot of issues lately with people not planning enough fuel or taking off below minimum required fuel per the federal aviation regulations, or even running out of fuel in flight, and that's clearly a big problem. So we want to try to go over some things that we can do to reduce those events from occurring. So biggest thing here, minimum takeoff fuel. This is extremely important. This is the absolute lowest amount of fuel that you can have on board the airplane on your prog page here. So you go prog 26.3 is how much we have on board the airplane right now. But that is the absolute lowest that you are legally allowed to take off with. If you have less than that, then unfortunately you're either going to have to call dispatch and try to possibly get this alternate taken off. That's one option you could do if this alternate's not required. So if we looked at the weather, we could do that real quick here. So look at the weather for Seattle. Do we require an alternate for this flight? The answer is, based off our ETA, no, we do not require an alternate right here. So 4 miles, light rain, mist, ceiling 2,000 overcast. So it's right at the minimum, right at the cusp of requiring an alternate, but we don't require an alternate. So we could get that taken off, and that would help us tremendously because that takes off 3,200 pounds from our min takeoff. So if we got rid of that alternate alone, that's putting us in a pretty good situation. 25,700 minus 3,200. So our min takeoff now is reduced to 22,500 if we got rid of this alternate. So that's one option you have. Another option, if let's say this alternate was required, the weather required this alternate at Seattle, then you could reduce this by a couple of 100 pounds. You could reduce your dispatch fuel, for instance. The hierarchy is, first thing we try to do is, do we need the alternate? Is the alternate required? The next thing we look at, the dispatch. Okay, do we have any dispatch? Can we shed this off by a couple 100 pounds, depending on how many airplanes are in front of us in the line? How long is it going to take for us to get to the runway to apply takeoff thrust if it's a very long departure line? Lastly, if we don't have any dispatch, then we can also call dispatch to try to get this cont hold removed, or not fully removed, but at least shed off a little bit of it, a couple 200, 300 pounds, whatever. But remember that the dispatch release and the pre-flight planning of the flight are jointly both responsible by the pilot in command, so the captain and the dispatcher. They have to be in full agreement of the flight. And so if there is not a full agreement between the pilot or the captain and the dispatcher, the flight is illegal and it cannot depart. So that's very important. But those are some things that we can do to reduce our chance of having to go back to the gate. If we look here, 121.639, this is a regulation that states that no person may dispatch or take off an airplane unless it has enough fuel, A, to fly to the airport at which it was dispatched, so in this case, Seattle, therefore to fly to and land the most distant alternate where required for the airport to which it was dispatched. So in this case, we have Portland. Is it required? It says where required. So is this a required alternate? If it's a required alternate, if Seattle requires this alternate, then unfortunately we can't take it off. But if it's not required, then we could take it off technically, as long as the dispatcher agrees to take that alternate off if he thinks that it's not going to be a problem. Thereafter, to fly for 45 minutes at normal cruise fuel consumption. And this part doesn't apply to us because we can't fly VFR anyway. And that's all on the dispatch release. So we got the fuel here to get to Seattle, we got the fuel here to get to our furthest alternate, and then we got the fuel here to go 45 minutes thereafter. That's our reserve, 3.6, 45 minutes. So the tally up of all that, 25.7. We also have to take into consideration cont hold and dispatch. The reason being is this reg right here, 121.647. We have to take wind and other weather forecasts into consideration. So part of that is we got additional fuel here for possible en route turbulence. That's our dispatch here, 1,000 pounds. When you fly lower because you want to get a better ride, if you're flying higher and the winds are bad and you got turbulence, if you fly lower, you're going to burn more fuel. You might get a better ride, but you're going to burn more fuel. So the dispatcher took that into consideration, gave us an extra 1,000 pounds in case we have to fly lower. Anticipated traffic delays, so that's your cont hold. So 1,400 pounds in this case, 15 minutes. So this is required fuel for the flight because the dispatcher took this into consideration. One instrument approach also for a possible missed approach at the destination. That's always going to be included in the alternate fuel 3.2. So that includes this one instrument approach and possible missed approach at destination. And D, any other conditions that may delay landing of the aircraft. So the dispatcher has to take all of those into consideration in order for the flight to be legal. So we have to contact dispatch, see, hey, can we get this min takeoff reduced slightly? And if the answer is yes, then cool, we'll do that, and we'll put the dispatcher's initials and the current Zulu time on the release, and we'll, mark the release accordingly to reduce the fuel. So say we want to get 1400 reduced to 1200 for a con hold. We just cross this 4 out, put a 2. That would make this 7, cross this 7 out, make that a 5. So now our min takeoff is 25.5. Put their initials, so the dispatcher's initials, and the Zulu time. Bada bing, bada boom, we're good to go. Unfortunately, if the dispatcher did not agree to reduce any of this fuel, then unfortunately the only thing we could do at that point is go back to the gate. So that pretty much sums that up. I don't know what else to really mention about fuel, but really just as long as you're not flying too quickly per how the dispatcher planned the flight. If you fly faster than how the flight was planned, the fuel numbers are going to be inaccurate. You're going to be burning more fuel than expected, which is definitely a problem. Something else that is really important, make sure that you go to your legs page here, route data, and you're putting in the wind correctly here for all your points between top of climb and top of descent. If you look on the release down here, you'll see these are your winds. So top of climb, 313, 126. And then you got X-Wing, 313, 126. You got Du Bois 306 at 110. I believe that's Denor, or no, it's Donnelly. It might be Donnelly, 291 at 85. And then BMO 272 at 69, Pendleton 270 at 71. So this will definitely affect your wind and your fuel burn. So your fuel burn will get affected based off of the wind. So it's really important to be putting that information into your FMC, and that'll give you your best chance of having your fuel numbers accurate on your FMC, so that you have a better idea of how much fuel you're going to arrive with once you're airborne. So that's something else to take into consideration. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and hope to see you guys in the next video. Take care. Hey guys, another quick video here. I want to go over takeoff weights and ensuring that you never exceed this ATOG, which is allowable takeoff gross weight. This is the absolute highest that we could ever take off based off of how this flight was planned. The ATOG is either going to be limited by takeoff, landing, or en route, and basically whichever one of these three is the lowest number between en route, landing, and takeoff is going to be your ATOG. So you see here 162.9, that's the lowest number between the three, and therefore our ATOG is limited by landing. So that's what that means. So in order to make sure that we do not exceed the landing limitation, we cannot take off above this weight, 162.9. That's the absolute highest we can ever take off. So in this case, we're planned to take off at 161.7. So we should be okay, unless we had like a bunch of standbys or something where the dispatcher didn't know that there were a bunch of standbys, and they came on board the airplane and we ran the numbers and realized, oh wait, now we're overweight. So that's just something to take into consideration. The other thing too, just make sure you don't exceed zero fuel weight. So 135.8, that's below 138.3, so we're good there. Obviously, we never want to exceed the tank capacity of the airplane, 46.1 for our max fuel weight, so make sure you don't exceed that. Takeoff weight is below our max structural weight here, 174.2. It's below ATOG, so we're good there. And the landing weight, 145.1, is below 146.3 for our max landing weight as well. So this looks to be like a legal release from what I can see, but that's just one little thing that I think is important to keep in mind. Make sure that you're looking at that. Now, when it comes to performance, this ATOG is very limited in SimBrief, the way SimBrief does its thing, okay? What that means is we actually have to go to performance, and we have to check based off of what we expect to get for takeoff and landing for our airports. We always want to check and do that before we leave the gate in Love Cars 5, because we could run into a situation where we're airborne, we run our numbers for landing, and oh my gosh, we are thousands of pounds over the limit for our landing runway. So we want to check that before we ever take off. So if we just do that here real quick, I'll just run a quick takeoff. Obviously, takeoff isn't typically going to be a problem. So MRTW exceeded by 5264. So that is a problem. Let's see what we can do to mitigate that. Let's put, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, we want to be doing this, you know, before we ever leave the gate. Obviously, we need to run our numbers, but even before we get the passengers on board the aircraft, because if we're like super overweight, well, you know, it's going to suck to have to kick all those passengers off, you know, so might as well be able to do this before we even, you know, board up the passengers, so we know how many passengers we have to keep here in Denver. So 5264 still max thrust, didn't do anything. Let me turn off bleeds, maybe that'll help. If I turn bleeds off, runway 34 left. So I've still exceeded by 2508. So unfortunately at that point, the only thing I can do is I gotta take off either fuel or take off zero fuel weight, which, I mean, I'm pretty much close to my minimum takeoff fuel of 25.7. I don't have much room to play with. So unfortunately, it looks like the only option at this point would be to take off payload. So we need to start deciding how many passengers we need to take off this airplane. So 2508, and we need to take off, let's say, well, let's see how many passengers that is. So 242 for adults. So that's about 10 passengers. I was assuming it was going to be about 10 passengers. So let's take off 11 passengers in that case. So so 11 times 242 is 2662. We can round that to 2.7. So what is 135.8 minus 2.7? That's 133.1. So now we got to change this to 133.1. And then we'll be able to get good numbers based off of this. So now we run it. All right, bleeds off, valid all range altitude. That's fine. I can get that corrected. So we'll just change that to 8,000 for Denver, something like that. It's not in the next version of ACARS. It's not going to be a problem, because if you have this 200 feet per nautical mile gradient, it's just not going to even take this into consideration, because this is standard IFR for your climb gradient 200. So let's run that again, and we'll see what we get. Bleeds off, and there we go. Now we got good numbers here. So that's one way to mitigate that. Obviously, changing the runway isn't really going to do much for us, because this is the longest runway for us at Denver. 34 left is 16,000 feet long. So you know, there's no other runway I can really change it to, unfortunately. So. Okay, cool. So now that we got that done, let's try to take a look at our landing data. So most likely this is all going to be accurate information. There's nothing here I need to change really for Seattle, most likely. If we take a look at the weather here for Seattle, we have, looks like light rain, and temperatures 2. So, okay, so we are definitely going to want to do engine anti-ice at a minimum. Probably do engine and wing just to see if we're going to have any limitations with that. Put yes for in-rear ice, and we'll see what that does for us. So let's request landing again, see if we're going to run into any problems. And it looks like we're good. So shouldn't have any issues going into Seattle. The real problem is taking off out of Denver. Must be the climb gradient out of, or not the climb gradient, but the climb limit weight out of Denver is what's unfortunately causing problems for our flight. But it was fine once we reduced the weight accordingly, and now we're good to depart. So that's why it's a good idea to do this in advance. Make sure you got you know, a good idea of once you know what runway you're going to be expecting for departure and everything like that. Try to get that mitigated. You know, reduce turn bleeds off. Try to force max thrust. you know, if you need engine anti-ice, then turn it on. But, you know, if you don't, then obviously have that off because that's going to impact your performance as well. So pretty much what we realized from process elimination, the only thing we really could do in that situation was just reduce zero fuel weight, and now we're legal to depart with these numbers. So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial. Stay tuned for the next video, and take care. We'll see you in the next one. Okay, guys, so I just want to go over a couple items that we didn't mention in the previous video. So first things first, this is your ATC call sign right here in the ATC flight plan section. Nothing else on the release shows your ATC call sign. This is the only thing that will show what your actual ATC call sign is. Everything else is for the company or the passengers. So flight 3176, that's when you brief the passengers on the PA, you're going to refer yourself as Southwest 3176. Well, let's say, hypothetically speaking, this actually said Southwest 9001. That would mean it's a stubbed flight. Anything with the 9000 call sign is revenue flight, so passengers, cargo on board the airplane, whatever. However, there's 2 flights with the same flight number in the ATC system with the FAA, and so dispatch had to change one of them to a 9000 call sign. So if you ever see that, that's what that means. So if you see 9001 or 9002 or whatever, and that's what your ATC call sign would actually be, not this. Just going, you know, just want to mention that real quick here. All right, so now that being said, going back to our issue with Denver here, with exceeding our MRTW, something we could do that would help us tremendously if the weather does not require an alternate at Seattle. We could remove this alternate, and that for sure is going to help us out. And then everyone can go, and we don't have to kick anyone off. But that being said, if the weather does require an alternate, then what we could do is we could find an alternate that's a little bit closer to Seattle, and that's going to reduce our burn here for the alternate, and therefore it's going to reduce our minimum takeoff fuel. And then that's going to allow us to either be able to take off, possibly, depending on, you know, the MRTW, or we just don't take off as much payload. We only have to take off a couple passengers versus having to take off like 10 or 12, as an example. So that's another thing that we could do to mitigate that issue. So that being said, I just want to go over the definitions of our fuels here real quick, just so everyone's aware. So cont hold is going to be typically for holding or extensive delays into our destination airport. Disbad is going to be issues en route, so turbulence en route, weather en route, or short minor delays into the airport that don't include holding. Extra is going to be additional fuel at the departure airport in addition to our taxi out fuel. And then our taxi out fuel is going to be fuel consumed on the ground with all engines running from the engine start to entering the takeoff runway prior to applying takeoff thrust. That's your taxi out fuel. Tanker fuel. So tanker fuel is going to be fuel added to the flight for economical purposes for the aircraft's next flight. So when we're talking about tankering, we're talking about the next flight for this aircraft. So the fuel is cheaper at the departure airport versus the arrival airport, for instance. If that's the case, we're going to want a tanker. Or in the event that there's a fuel shortage at the arrival airport. So additional fuel that's carried for the aircraft's next flight. That's what tankering fuel is. At Southwest, you only tanker up to 1,000 pounds below ATOG or up to 1,000 pounds below max fuel weight, whichever comes first. Typically, it's going to be ATOG that comes first. So now that being said, taking a look at the FMC here, so our FOB here, this is how much fuel we currently have on board the airplane, 26.3, 11.8, this is 11.7, whatever. It's kind of fluctuating. This is how much fuel we're arriving with at Seattle, okay? Now, if we take a look at our release, it says that we're going to be arriving at our destination of Seattle with 8.1 on board. If we take a look at our calculator, we subtract 1.9 from that. It shows we're arriving with 6.2. Now that also includes disbad. It's not taking disbad into consideration that we burn that disbad or that con hold. So if we're burning through all this fuel over here, now we're possibly running into a situation where we're arriving as low as 4.2 on board, which is dangerously close to min fuel. 4,000 is min fuel. 3,000 is emergency fuel typically in the 737. So those are things you definitely need to take into consideration. So if I start to see that this is around 4,000, that I'm going to be arriving 4,000, I'm going to be arriving min fuel. I need to notify ATC. I need to let them know, hey, we're going to be arriving min fuel. And if this was 4,000, that would mean we're currently at min fuel. If this was at 3,000, that would mean we're at emergency fuel right now. So if I start to see that this is below 4.4, I'm definitely starting to pay attention a lot more for sure. If I have an alternate, I'm starting to look at this. Hey, I got a 1.9 burn to Boeing field, and I start to see that this says around 6,000. Well, let's see what 6,000 gives us. If we do 6,000 minus 1.9, that gives us 4.1. We're pretty much arriving with min fuel when we get to Boeing field. So that's something you definitely need to take into consideration. And we're starting to look at possibly diverting at that point. So if we take a look at this reg, 121.627, no pilot in command, so the captain may allow a flight to continue toward airport to which has been dispatched or released, so Seattle in this case, in the opinion that the PIC, so the captain or the dispatcher for domestic flag operations, the flight cannot be completed safely unless in the opinion of the PIC there is no safer option, no safer procedure. In that event, the continuation toward the airport is an emergency situation. And so you need to declare an emergency with ATC and get that sucker on the ground at your destination. Otherwise, you need to start looking at your options to divert. So definitely something you need to take into consideration. Now, we also want to take a look at our route data page here. Take a look at all the winds on the route data page. And we need to make sure that those winds match up here on the release. And if they do, that's definitely a bad situation, because that means that we're planned correctly, and we're going to definitely need to divert probably in that situation. If they aren't, we need to start programming those winds in there in the route data and see if that helps us with our fuel. And if it doesn't, then unfortunately we're going to have to divert. So hierarchy of diversion stations, how do we determine where we're going to divert to? So number one, airline base airport. We want to go somewhere where it's a base for our crew and maintenance. Downline station, so that's a non-base that Southwest goes to. So any station that Southwest has service to, that's our number two option. A large airport that has a runway length of at least 7,000 feet. That's your third option. Fourth option, a medium airport that has a length of at least 6,000 feet. That's kind of that's the hierarchy of how you're looking for places to divert to. So when we're looking for an alternate, typically speaking, we want the weather to be at the time of arrival. If the alternate has two working ILS approaches to two different but suitable runways, we want a ceiling of at least 400 and a visibility of at least 1 mile. If the alternate only has one working ILS approach, then we want a ceiling of at least 600 ceiling and 1.5 mile visibility. For any alternate, the weather must be at least this good or better as long as it is our alternate, even while we are en route to our destination. The moment we divert, the alternate becomes our new destination at that point, and we only require the weather to be at the diversion airport, only to be above published approach minimums on the approach plate. So I hope that kind of explains how we're determining where we want to divert to weather-wise and everything like that, and what the weather for the approach minimums need to be based off of if it's our alternate or if it's actually our destination, if we've already determined that we're going to divert to this airport and now it's our new destination. All right, guys, that'll sum up this video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your crew base manager, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care. Hey guys, before we go, I just wanted to address a couple things about alternate airport selection specifically for Southwest. So number one, DCA, Washington Reagan Airport. That airport can never be used as an alternate. Just want to make sure you are mindful of that. As well, departing out of DCA, we typically don't want to have to come back and land at DCA. That's typically considered a problem, especially with national security. So we definitely want to, avoid having to go back to DCA. So typically it's a good idea to have Washington Dulles or Baltimore Washington airports, so BWI. One of those airports is a good idea for a takeoff alternate out of DCA. It's not required or anything. It's just, a good practice to do so. So John Wayne Airport, SNA, you typically want to avoid that airport as an alternate. I would never put that as an alternate unless I really needed to. So your airports in the Southern California area that you'd probably want to use as an alternate would be Los Angeles or San Diego or Ontario, depending on the weather. Burbank is another one you'd want to avoid. Santa Barbara too. So pretty much anywhere with a short runway you want to avoid using as an alternate. LaGuardia is another one that I would avoid just because it gets so busy, and so that's definitely one that you'd want to avoid. And also Midway. I wouldn't use Midway typically as an alternate unless it was like a really good day and I wasn't like too heavy. 700s typically you can get away with using Midway as an alternate, but as 800 and max you probably want to avoid. So I hope that clears up some confusion on alternate airport selection for Southwest Virtual. If you guys have any questions, like I've said before, reach out to your crew-based manager. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.